Avengers Endgame is coming out and everyone is dying to see it. It is the conclusion of a movie series that's been going on for 11 years, and this is going to be the 22nd film in that series. If you include the runtime for Captain Marvel, that's almost 45 hours worth of content. That's a lot. If you have never seen these movies, it can be a really daunting task to get into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So today, I'm here to help break down what the MCU is and what movies to watch. Since there are a lot of movies, I'm going to be breaking this down into 3 videos. This first video will be about the origins of the MCU and the first 6 movies. These videos aren't meant to be an in-depth look at each of the movies. It's more or less a guide or tool to figure out which movies you should watch. However, not every person watches movies for the exact same reasons. So I'm going to break it down into 3 different categories. First, do you need to watch it? Basically, is it relevant to the overarching story? Or is it still relevant to movies today? Second is, should you watch it? Ignoring the fact that it's relevant to other movies, what makes it good? What makes it stand out? And should you watch it regardless of necessity? And third, what if you don't have time? If you can't watch everything I recommend, this is the bare minimum to understand what's going on in these movies. I should probably also mention that all these movies have little 1-minute scenes after the credits that both tease sequels and hint to things going on between the movies. Some only have 1, others have more. I'll mention that as well. Back in the early 2000s, movies based on Marvel comic book characters were both owned and distributed by different studios. But then, Kevin Feige, a producer on many of these movies, asked the question, what if there was an Avengers movie that used superheroes from multiple movies and brought them together, just like in the comic books? Using Marvel characters that currently weren't owned by other companies and buying characters from other companies, Marvel Studios began. And it began with Iron Man came out in 2008 and was directed by Jon Favreau. It stars Robert Downey Jr. as the titular Iron Man. Believe it or not, this movie was actually kind of a huge risk. Iron Man wasn't really a popular character at the time, so the fact that this movie did well at all is kind of a miracle. This movie is the obvious starting point for a lot of people, but do you need to watch it? Not necessarily. There's a certain other movie that explains the character of Iron Man pretty well and everything you need to know, and we'll talk about that later. So should you watch it anyways? Yes. We get to see one of the central characters of the MCU before other superheroes show up, so this easily makes it the most grounded movie out of all of them. The movie also sets up the inner conflict and motivations that are still relevant to Iron Man to this day, and it also sets up the supporting characters around Iron Man very well. There is also one scene after the credits of this movie, and it's a pretty memorable one. If you don't have time, it's okay to skip this one. On to the next one! Not to be confused with Ang Lee's Hulk, The Incredible Hulk is a 2008 film directed by Louis Leterrier. It stars Edward Norton as the Hulk, and it's the only time Edward Norton plays the Hulk. This movie is kind of awkward to watch now, considering that it's ignored by a lot of the other movies, and because of that, I would say you don't need to watch it. You don't need to watch it to understand who Hulk is. Only one actor returns, and he doesn't even reference this movie, and this movie's events are only referenced one other time. Should you watch this movie? It's kind of hard to recommend, considering everything that I just laid out before. On top of that, it's not that good of a movie. I'm not saying it's an awful movie, but it's not that interesting to watch. The action scenes aren't really memorable, and the CGI doesn't age very well. This movie can't even get a post-credit scene right. The after-credit scene isn't after the credits. They put it right after the movie ends, but before the credits begin. How do you mess that up? What if you don't have time? Skip it. In fact, you could watch every MCU movie except for one, and then this would be the one you should skip. Now, on to the first sequel in the MCU. Iron Man 2 is a 2010 film directed by Jon Favreau. It is the first sequel in the MCU and the film that formally introduces Nick Fury and Black Widow. But you don't need to see it. Again, there's a certain other movie that serves as a better introduction to all these characters. The after credit scene isn't really necessary either, since it's in the next movie, so you don't need to see it. Should you watch it? On one hand, this movie does kind of feel a little bit repetitive and does touch upon a lot of the things the first one did, just not as well. But on the other hand, if you really like Iron Man 1, we do delve a bit more into Tony and his relationship with his father, which is brought up a little bit more in the other movies. What if you don't have time? Skip it. Next. Thor came out in 2011 and is directed by Kenneth Branagh and stars Chris Hemsworth, the first of many Chris's in the MCU. This is the first film that takes us outside of Earth and into a different realm of the MCU. But do you need to see it? No. There's a certain other film that delves into Thor and some of his supporting characters that we're going to talk about later. But should you watch it? That depends. This movie is a little divisive. For the MCU's first cosmic adventure, about 60% of this movie actually takes place on Earth, with a Thor that doesn't even have powers. That can kind of be a turnoff for a lot of people. However, it does use a lot of that time to develop its characters, so as long as you go into it knowing that it's not 100% a fantasy movie, you should be alright. The after credit scene for this movie is pretty good too, and it sets up for that certain other movie. What if you don't have time? Skip the movie. Speaking of time, let's time travel back to World War II and see... Captain America, the First Avenger, came out in 2011 and is directed by Joe Johnston. This movie stars Chris Evans as Captain America and is the second prominent Chris in the MCU, but certainly not the last. This is also easily the most confusing title and annoying title in the MCU. Hey dude, you wanna watch the First Avenger? Sure dude, I love the First Avengers. Wait, I thought this was the First Avengers. What do you mean? This is the First Avenger. Anyways, do you need to see it? No. There's a MacGuffin in this movie that returns in a later movie, but you won't be confused if you skip this movie. So is it even worth seeing? Absolutely! This movie just has so much heart in it, and Captain America, who before this movie was kind of seen as like this super cheesy guy, was written with so much love and respect. It's great. However, I will say the scene after the credits of the movie is extremely dated because it's just a teaser trailer for the next movie. What if you don't have time? Don't watch it. Again, there's a certain other movie that we still have yet to talk about. He keeps on bringing up this certain other movie. When's he just gonna spit it out? Well, non-existent angry commenter, we're actually about to talk about it right now. The Avengers is a 2012 movie directed by Joss Whedon, and it stars all the actors that I mentioned before, except Edward Norton. It's the first crossover movie in the MCU, and it's easily one of the biggest movies ever. This is the first MCU movie to cross $1 billion. But, do you need to see it to get everything going on? Yeah, actually. Arguably, this is the first movie that you need to see. A majority of MCU movies reference this movie's events, and it's a pretty major turning point for the series. It also is useful because it tells you basically everything you need to know about the other characters without watching the other movies. This movie is the first to have two end credit scenes, the first one being after the animated credits, which is pretty important to watch, and then the second, which is after the black and white credits, which is a joke. I actually meant like it's a haha funny sort of joke, not like, oh, it's a joke as an insult, so I don't know why I said it like that. So what am I saying? Like, should you watch it? Yeah. This is easily the most stylized film so far, which makes it very different compared to the others, and the action is great in this movie. There's lots of cool power usage and lots of fun moments, not just in the action scenes, but overall. There's tons of great just fun moments and cool wow moments in the action scenes. But what if I don't have time? Watch it anyway. By just starting with Avengers and skipping the other 5 films, you easily saved about 10 hours. Phase 1 of the MCU had a lot of setting up to do, and they do it pretty well. There were a couple of missteps, but the movies do in fact get better from here. I think you should definitely watch Iron Man, Thor, Captain America the First Avenger, and The Avengers. But if you don't have time, just watch The Avengers. That'll be it for this part. So in the next part, we'll be discussing the next 6 movies in the MCU. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.